200 years ago, in the summer of the imperial year 2301, a curse fell upon the old world. The empire of man, torn apart by a bloody civil war for generations, was struck with another blight. The crops fell to bad weather, while what was stored in the granaries was eaten by the plague of insects. Reports from distant corners of the realm spoke of pigs standing on two legs, screaming in human voices throughout the night. The city streets were filled with madmen preaching the end times, brought about by the ruinous powers. Kurgan warlord Asavar Kul saw that as a sign from the dark gods he followed. He rallied his hordes of barbarians and started his march to the realms of man. The Chaos Gods blessed him with their gifts, summoning demonic legions to aid him in his quest. He was to lead the horde of demons and barbarians, to lay waste to the cities of men, desecrate the temples, and destroy the civilized world, bringing about the end times. And so he was known as Asavar Kul, the Anointed, the ever-chosen of Chaos. The Great War against Chaos, in my opinion, is the single most important event in Warhammer lore. To explain why, we will need to talk about Lord of the Rings, societal progress, and Nazis. Well, let's start with the lore. Chapter 1. The Lore. In 1152, Manfred von Zelt, known as Ratslayer, was assassinated. Elector counts failed to elect a new emperor for 7 years, starting a period of mistrust and political power games between the elector counts. In 1159, a new emperor was officially elected, Wilhelm of Stirland. But this did not end the turmoil, as one of the electors had an issue with the new emperor. Grand Duchess Ottilia of Talabecland saw Wilhelm but a puppet in the hands of the cult of Sigmar, whom she considered liars. You see, she didn't think Sigmar was a god and considered the whole cult of Sigmar to be corrupt, playing political games while hiding behind a false god. She approached the High Priest of Cult of Ulrich, the organization that was always suspicious of this belief in the God King. After a long private discussion, he was happy to move his cult to Stirland, her capital, and support her claim to the throne. Ottilia proclaimed herself an empress, Ottilia I, and so the empire became divided in two for 200 years. Later on, in 1547, Siegfried, Elector Count of Middenland, after being threatened with a crossbow at an election of the next emperor to vote in line, proclaimed himself emperor, again being supported by another High Priest of Ulrich, therefore becoming the first Wolf Emperor. So here comes the year 2301. For the last 1149 years, the empire, as one state, didn't exist. Basically for half of the lifetime of the Empire of Man. Makes you think about how unified empire really is from a political, social and cultural standpoint. Let us talk of a great man, who was destined to bring the Golden Age and unity in such dark and desperate times. His name is Magnus von Bilthofen. He was a minor noble from the city of Nuln. I will not go deep into the details of everything he did and how, but will quickly go over the deeds of the most important person after Sigmar in the Imperial canon. He led a resistance of fellow Sigmarites in the city of Nuln against the incursion of demon-summoning cult of Tzinj called Magi. This event was marked by a twin-tailed comet appearing in the skies. That made Magnus a chosen of Sigmar in the eyes of the people of Nuln. Magnus started his march across the empire, asking the nobles and commoners alike to join him in his attempt at stopping the ongoing invasion of the Ever-Chosen that was currently erasing Kislev from the face of this world. Every count Magnus approached supported his cause out of their goodwill, piety, or more likely their fear of going against someone who is seen as a champion of God King Sigmar himself, with a giant crusade to back up his claim. By the time he reached Middenheim, he had emerged the biggest army ever assembled in the empire. But the stubborn cult of Ulrich was never too quick to support the Sigmarites and their political ambitions. The High Priest challenged Magnus, claiming he's but a charlatan and a heretic. But Magnus did something truly miraculous. He walked through the eternal flames of Ulrich burning in the temple and came out of them unscathed. This event clearly showed that not only Sigmar, but also Ulrich was on his side. Now with both cults of Sigmar and Ulrich joining his Grand Crusade, Magnus started his march on Kislev. Okay, so if you want the whole story, go read the wiki or watch some more video. I have no time for this. We have the whole Nazi thing to get to because I dropped that ball like a couple of minutes ago, didn't follow up on it, so like, let's get over this as quickly as possible. Cue the music. Long story short, the Chaos Horde was defeated at the gates of Kislev. Asavar Kul, the anointed ever-chosen of Chaos, was killed in a single combat against Magnus. First human battle mages used, Erdengarde relieved, Prague leveled, Mordheim taken over the GW store by burning it down to the ground. Otsland and Ostermark's forced purge of beastmen, Magnus crowned, colleges of magic founded, infrastructure funded, conclave of faith established, prison reform enacted, died in bed as a beloved hero of the Empire, likely to be canonized very soon by the biggest Magnus fanboy alive today, Grand Theologist Volkmar the Grim. Nerd. So 200 years pass and Empire is in shit now, filled with awful corrupt people and awful corrupted people on top of that. But why? Put in pin in that. So Tolkien was very weird about history. Chapter 2. Tolkien's Theory of History. J.R.R. Tolkien thought that Britain and authentic British culture was dead. Many people thought that at the turn of the century. It was a depressing time filled with depressed people. But he didn't think Britain died when the Empire fell apart, nor when the Industrial Revolution destroyed the commons during the Enclosure Movement and Uruk-kai'd the hell out of the English countryside. He considered, of all events he could have picked from, the Norman invasion to be the end of British culture, which is a weird outlook on history even for crazy conservatives of his time. Not only he was skeptical about people thinking that newer is better, but he also saw history as a cycle that gets worse with every spin. For Tolkien, every major event is a mere shadow of the grander and more important event from the past. The Second World War is just a shadow of the Great War, which itself is a shadow of the struggles that preceded it. You see, the struggle of the Fellowship of the Ring against Sauron is just a mere shadow of the Battle of the Last Alliance, which was just a shadow of the struggles against Morgoth, Sauron's master. Fantasy, especially inspired by Tolkien, is always set in the Dark Ages. In this Dark Age, a newly forged blade is not even comparable to the magical weapons wielded by the heroes of the ages past of your D&D world, for example. This is why you go down into the dungeons to recover magic items from the dragons, or something. You can look at many other examples in fantasy as well as science fantasy and find that this is repeated everywhere. Star Wars is set in a world where the Golden Age, being the more civilized Galactic Republic, has already passed. Game of Thrones, where Targaryen dynasty and the time when the kings of past ruled, was the Golden Age. And now the kings of the Seven Kingdoms are torn apart by the treachery and civil war, with the looming threat of White Walkers. Game of Thrones actually is a great example of how to use those tropes while being critical of them and making it more realistic and lively. Warhammer is no exception and utilizes the Ages idea as well, but in a more vague and obscure way. I would argue that Magnus the Pious represents the golden age of Empire, creating a sort of grand narrative of fight between good and evil, order and chaos, while also being a representation of the unity of the Empire. Tolkien's influences don't stop here. Neither Archaon nor Asavar was the ever-chosen. Archaon was number 5, by the way. The first and the greatest one was Morkar the Uniter, who, by the way, was defeated by Sigmar himself. This whole Karl Franz versus Archaon has nothing on that battle. By the way, Archaon's armor used to belong to Morkar, so it is more than 2,000 years old. Please refer to the above-mentioned idea that the technology is getting worse. Of course, it is not only Tolkien's theory of history which shapes the Warhammer narrative. There are many elements here, The biggest one that sticks out is the great man theory of history. In modern times, no respected historian will defend this theory. So much of history is trade, labor, social and political movements, climate, resources, and so on. These things shape history, and not men with funny metal hats. So who will stand up for the soldier who served in the army of the emperor? For the peasant who plows and the craftsman who labors? Who will stand up for the common man? We will get to that in another video. I remember reading somewhere that Marienburgers see Imperials as living through the past, remembering the deeds of old and venerating them too much. I think this makes a lot of sense if you look at Tolkien and how he created this feeling of nostalgia and longing for the past in his writing. Emulating this style and approach may help you to create this very special aesthetic in your Warhammer games and homebrew settings. So many things in Warhammer Old World and the Empire in particular has roots in Magnus's reign. Institutions such as colleges of magic, specific buildings or lack of them, grievances, political and personal, and obviously magic items. The core rulebook of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd edition mentions only 2 magic items. It explicitly states that magic items are very rare and get their power from veneration by the people or from being old and historically important. One of the items mentioned is called Spear of Hierophant, which was a spear used by one of the lieutenants of Magnus the Pious during the Great War against Chaos, which was really good at killing demons. By the way, it's a great design for making magic items. Making them specifically good at one particular thing is a great way to do magic items in Warhammer without making it completely unbalanced. And now it is time to talk about why you came here to dislike this video and leave a hate comment. Chapter 3. The Critique. What do you value in life? Do you follow a personal philosophy, like utilitarianism? Do you have a personal ideology? Maybe you're a free market big L liberal. Maybe you're a progressive. Are you a socialist?
Are you now? Or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
No matter what you are, I am almost certain that we all can agree on one thing. Some kind of progress is possible, and is going on as time goes by. Of course, we may disagree on details, but if you would ask a layman whether it is better to live now than in medieval ages, or prehistory, they would almost certainly say foreign shopping malls are better than the plague. But Tolkien would disagree. Tolkien thought it is getting worse with every generation. Not only when it comes to fantasy universe, but also the real world. We are lesser sons of greater science. I see a lot of problems looking at history like that. Being skeptical or pessimistic is not bad per se, but actually saying that progress is bad, or rather that the progress is not actually progressing, is not just bad, but kind of dangerous, isn't it? And don't start on how it doesn't matter, it's all just fiction. Fiction is influenced by real life, and real life influences fiction. The whole purpose of art is to leave an impact on the consumer of art. Our culture as humans is based on teaching virtues by using allegory, fairy tales, and internet memes. That's why current philosophy is just writing books on Hegel and talking about Batman movies. Tolkien's philosophy of history basic claim is that our people used to be amazing back in the day, but now we are in shambles, and one might assume that he thinks that we should relive the glory of the ages past. It is very easy to make a jump from "it used to be better before" to "we should go back." This kind of longing for the ages past, claiming that we are currently living in the dark ages and should reclaim what is truly ours, sounds a lot like what Nazis did with their idea of the Third 1,000-Year Reich. They romanticized an imaginary version of the past. This is why it was the Third Reich, and saw the civilization in the fallen state. But they didn't stop there. They wanted to go back to the glory of the past and find someone to blame for their perceived fall. I'm not saying that the Tolkien was a proto-fascist and we need to cancel him on Twitter. All I'm saying is that the ages structure and the great man theory of history and now the grand narratives should be questioned and critiqued like any other mode of thinking, ideology, or presupposition. Tolkien never wanted to go back. For him, the fall has happened, and it is impossible to turn back time. But still, salvation will happen. Frodo did destroy the ring. He was saved by the eagles. Here is where the concept of eucatastrophe comes in. Eucatastrophe is defined as a sudden turn of events at the end of a story, which ensures that the protagonist does not perish. It is that glimmer of hope that should be kept even in the hardest of times. It is a rather Christian concept as well. After the fall comes the salvation at the end of the apocalypse. And I don't think that hope is problematic. It is great to think that as things get worse and worse, in the end, the eagles will come. I think it is important to understand how different narratives are constructed, so that you can create better narratives yourself, as well as to better understand the world around you with narratives in the media, games, and books. In the words of the foul priestess of the tainted ruinous cult of gamer hatred, Anita Sarkeesian,
but please keep in mind that it's both possible, and even necessary, to simultaneously enjoy a piece of media while also being critical of its more pernicious aspects.
do I think that the grand narrative approach to history and great man theory is harmful? Yes. Is it extremely reductive and can lead to awful and dangerous conclusions? Of course. Do I also think that it is
badass to aspire to the great deeds of the heroes of the old, walking in the footsteps of giants as you recover the forgotten artifacts, the breaches of Ergus Lamentos, the champion of man, and use it to slay the great demon, Tom, the unholy, who was banished from this realm 3,000 years ago in the age of the Queen Erika, the Slayer of Elves. Well, yeah. Tolkien made it cool. And it is still pretty cool.
Thank you very much for watching this video. I would love some feedback in the comments. Don't forget to follow my social media and check out the description for all the useful links and stuff like that. I almost forgot to include this thing. So I promised in the previous episode to include a piece of interesting, supplement every time. And this episode, we're having a very special one. Have you ever had your players enter a tavern and asked what is on the menu and be completely terrified and confused and told them, pork. Yeah, pork. Pork and beer, that's what we have. Well, I have a solution for you. It is a very special, easily printed and you can stick it anywhere you want, or like put it in your papers. It is a special rollable table of different foods of the Empire. It even has different, it's like lower class food, upper class food, food that you would get at the seaside or at the riverside. It's very, very useful. I used it a lot, and it provides some very good flavor for your games. Flavor, very tasty. Link to that is in the description, so feel free to use it. Don't forget to press the bell button to turn on notification, because next time, we are overthrowing the Emperor Karl Franz.